Hey everybody, it's Terry. I'm here with one of my new models, and I talked about this airplane in a recent live stream, but I thought I would put this video together for those of you who missed the live stream, or if you just wanted to see more details about it. And I got this model in a recent trade that included a few other airplanes, and I would love to tell you what it's called, but I just don't know. The person that I got it from also got it secondhand, and they were told that it was some sort of engineering project from Cornell University. So that seems like a good story to me, so let's just stick with that. Now, the first thing that you would notice about it is just how big it is. Let me collapse the tripod here. Now, this airplane has a wingspan of 10 feet. The chord of the wing is 14 inches, and that calculates out to a wing area of 12 square feet, which is a lot of wing. The fuselage is 6 feet long, and that all works out to an airplane that has a very sizable footprint. So let's take a walk around and see some of the other features of this model. I think maybe from this perspective you get a little bit better idea of just how big this wing is. And looking at the covering on the wing, I'm not quite sure what it is. It is a fabric. I believe it's an iron-on fabric because it does shrink when I put heat to it. But it looks like it's a fabric that's been ironed on and then painted after the fact. So I don't know the specific brand, but like most aspects of this model, the workmanship that went into covering it is excellent. And moving around here, we've got the firewall. This is designed for a pusher motor, and I don't know if it was intended for gas or glow or large electric. I'm not really sure, but assuming that the motor shaft is in the middle of the bolt pattern here, you've got just enough room for a 15-inch propeller to go there. Then looking at the rear of the fuselage, this is all sheet balsa that's been primed and painted. And come back here, you see just how nicely the vertical stabilizer fares into the fuselage. And again, this vertical is a built-up structure that's been sheeted with balsa. You see the horizontal stabilizer here. Very traditional construction with ribs and spars. Now this actually is plastic covering in comparison to the fabric covering that's up front. But once again, excellent craftsmanship all throughout. You can see the elevators here. And actually, let's take a look at the elevator control mechanism. We'll pull off this hatch. Well, even the hatch. This is carved balsa. You can see just how cleanly that's been done. And this piece is fiberglassed and painted. Very tough, but also nice and light. And here we can see the mechanism. We've got a bell crank that's embedded in the vertical stabilizer. And then a push rod that comes out to some brass pieces that slave the elevators together. This all works very nicely. And these elevator halves and stabilizer halves are removable. They can pull out. And I have to assume that there's a push rod that goes down through the vertical stabilizer where there's another bell crank. And I know that there's a flex push rod that goes up to the battery compartment. The radio compartment. So combine all that together, and this actually works really smoothly with very little slop and very little resistance. So very nice setup. Let's put this cover back on. And the rudder, again, a nice built-up structure with plastic covering, a big nylon horn here. And it looks like the exit for a flex push rod was right here. And the sleeve for the push rod is installed in the fuselage, but there was no cable, so I just have to assume they never completed that part of the build. So let's keep walking around here and take a look at it. And here on the port wingtip, there's some interesting stuff. This is a plywood piece that's been varnished, and I want you to notice just how cleanly all of this has been trimmed. And none of the covering is wrinkled or folded around these curves here. It's just very nice, neat work. And it looks as if there could be more that's bolted to the outside, but I don't think there's any other wing panels. These are blind nuts, so I think they had some sort of wingtip that could be bolted on into those blind nuts. And this tube here, I'm not really sure what the purpose is, but my best guess is that it's a conduit for wires that go up to the radio compartment. So either they had a sensor or lights or something out here in the wingtip, and this is the conduit for the wires. The wing is, again, 10 feet in span, and that's made up in 3 different panels. The outer panels are 2 feet long each, and I can separate this a little bit to show you. Pull that apart. Again, we've got plywood end ribs, and then steel tube joiner, and then a steel tube anti-rotation pin. And again, you can see this conduit for wires that go all the way to the middle section. And we'll slide this back. That all fits nice and tight with a good even gap. And moving up here, we've got what I assume are spoilers. Let's see if I can get my finger into there. There we go. So my assumption is that this is hinged in the front to work as a spoiler. Now it seems to be pretty small, not much surface area for a wing this big. But if you look through, there's also a spoiler on the bottom. And we've got two push rods here, so these would work in unison. There's a bell crank back here that moves them both together. And interestingly, let's pull off this panel. We've got a flex cable that runs through the wing out to that bell crank. So you can see when I work the cable, both of those push rods move together. And this is another one of those aspects of the build that looks like it was never completed. So I'm making a few assumptions here, but that seems pretty cut and dry. Now we move over to this section, and you can look inside of the structure and get a little bit better idea of just how cleanly this thing was built. All the joints are nice and tight with no gaps and no visible glue, and just about everything has a gusset inside. And we can pull this top hatch off. And even the hatch itself, this is a 1/16 inch plywood on the top, and on the back you've got basswood doublers, and they've even filled in the space with 1/4 inch balsa. I'm not sure why they felt like they needed to do that, but they did it, and they did an excellent job with it. So very nice stuff. And then you peek inside here. I assume the fuel tank would go in here. Again, you've got a plywood sheeting on the outside, basswood doublers, and then balsa filler in there. All just very nice, tidy work. Moving a little bit more forward, we've got a huge hatch here. Fits very tightly. Again, more of the same, plywood sheeting with basswood doublers. They didn't do the balsa filler there, so no foul on that. But you look inside, and you've got more of this exquisite work. You can see all of these braces, and it's probably hard to tell in this camera view, but all of these joints are just super tight with no gaps, no glue blobs anywhere, just very nice, tidy work. Someone spent a whole lot of time putting this together. And even the formers are so cleanly cut and installed. It's just beautiful, beautiful work. Now this nose cone, I believe, is solid balsa that's been carved and sanded to shape and then fiberglassed and painted. And interestingly, it is removable. There's screws here that go into blind nuts on the front of this. So I don't know if they had different sensors or other packages that could go in there, but anyway, that is removable. Everything that I talked about before is the good news with this airplane. Unfortunately, there's bad news as well. And all of that bad news pretty much distills down to the simple fact that this airplane is heavy. So all of these plywood formers and the plywood sides and the basswood braces and the steel tubes and the primer and the fiberglass and the paint, well, it all adds up to make a very heavy airplane. The model, as you see it, with no servos, no running gear, just the bare airframe, weighs 15 pounds. I did a small experiment, and I found that I needed to add 4 pounds of lead into the nose to get it to balance at the 30% mark of the wing chord. So now we're at 19 pounds for an airplane that still has no radio or power system. And that's just pretty heavy for a model this size. Also keep in mind that this is a pusher, so the engine is going to go back here behind the center of gravity. The servos are located behind the center of gravity as well. So you're going to have the weight of these components as well as additional lead necessary to keep the airplane balanced. And don't forget, you're also going to need landing gear. And for a model this size, it's going to be pretty beefy and heavy. So at the end of the day, you've got an airplane that's going to be pretty doggone heavy. My theory is that whoever built this model, they built it well, but they got to this point and they figured out what a pig it was going to be and decided to just cut their losses. I think that's where I'm at this point as well. This is a beautiful, well-constructed airplane, but it's just too heavy. So you'd have to be a real idiot to invest any time or money into making this model fly. So here's what we're going to do. Forget about the pusher motor. Too much weight behind the center of gravity, and you're too limited by propeller choices. I'm thinking that because all of these formers are so strong, any one of them could actually be a firewall. So maybe we can move the power system up front and make the nose weight and the power system one and the same and keep the overall weight down. I figure I need around 1,500 to 2,000 watts just to get this thing off the ground. The problem is I don't have any motors capable of that kind of power output right now. So what I've done is I've come up with this. This is 1x2 with a motor mount on each end. And maybe if I mount that behind this first former, I can use 2 of these Rimfire 32 motors. These are good for 800 or 900 watts each. So maybe together that'll be enough power. Now I'm thinking 12-8 propellers with 4-cell batteries, that'll get me enough weight to balance the airplane and enough power to get it off the ground. Maybe. I don't know. All of the modifications are complete, and this airplane is now ready to fly. Actually, spoiler alert, I've already flown it, but I wanted to show you some of the things that I've done to get it to this point. Now, we were originally talking about a 19-pound empty airframe weight in balanced form, but by moving all of the power system components to the nose, I was actually able to get the ready-to-fly airplane in at just over 20 pounds, and that's way better than I ever expected. So I'm really happy about that. You may see that I have renamed the model Plywood Overcast. And I knew from the beginning that the airframe had a lot of plywood in it, but as I went through and made these modifications, some of the areas that I thought were balsa before actually turned out to be plywood, like the whole rear boom of the fuselage. So it definitely earns this nickname. So let's talk a little bit now about the control system. I've got one standard size Futaba digital servo and the compartment that was originally designed for radio gear here, and it drives the elevator through the flex push rod and bell crank system that I explained before, and that all works great. The rudder is a little bit different because I was not able to find the flex push rod that I needed to use the stock control system. So what I ended up doing is placing another standard size Futaba digital in the tail, and it drives the rudder through an external 440 push rod that's maybe 10 inches long. Now, of course, the center of gravity has been a concern from the beginning, so I needed to find a way to justify adding the weight of a standard size servo in the tail. And I was able to do that with some changes that I had made to the horizontal stabilizer. These are the original joiner rods that connected each half of the horizontal stabilizer. And it's basically 2 steel rods and a steel tube. And altogether, these parts weigh more than 2 ounces. Well, I happen to have some carbon fiber parts that were the same diameter, and I was able to swap those out, and the carbon fiber parts weigh just over 10 grams. So that more than compensated for the weight of the servo in the tail. So that was a big plus. Now for the spoilers, I felt like they weren't large enough to be effective on this model, nor did I think they were necessary. So for now, I've just got the spoilers on top and bottom on both wings taped over. And yes, that effectively makes this a 3-channel airplane. And if it isn't the world's largest 3-channel RC model, it definitely has to be a contender for the heaviest. I wonder if they give out trophies for that. Now let's talk a little bit about the power system. We'll remove the hatch here. You can see this cross beam is bolted to the second former here, and there's a Rimfire 32 motor on each side with 12-8 propellers, and each motor has a 75 amp Castle Creation speed control connected to it, and the speed controls are connected to the receiver with just a standard Y cable, so there's no differential thrust or anything like that. Now, originally, I had 2 4-cell 3200 or 3300 milliamp hour LiPos placed up against the firewall. One battery was connected to each speed control, and then there was another 12 ounces of lead inside this nose cone to balance out the airplane. And I was using some older batteries, and on the day of the Maiden, I found out that those batteries weren't really up to the task of powering the system. Basically, at full throttle, I was hitting low voltage cutoff and not making nearly the power that the power system should be. But I was feeling lucky that day, and I decided to try it anyway, and long story short, I was able to get this model in the air and around the pattern once and back on the ground without damaging anything. But after that, I did make some changes. So what I did is I pulled out the 12 ounces of lead in the nose and replaced it with a third battery. These 4-cell 3200 milliamp hour batteries happen to weigh 12 ounces. So now I've got 3 batteries that go up against the firewall, and I made a harness here. This connects the 3 batteries in parallel to the 2 speed controls in parallel. So it basically all works as one system. And with this setup, everything reaches full power as it should, and I get 50% more capacity in my battery system. So that's all great. With the revamped power system, I'm now getting a power loading of about 75 watts per pound, which is actually pretty good for rolling takeoffs and decent climb performance. Keep in mind that this is a 3-channel airplane, so it actually doesn't like windy conditions very much. And to be honest, it's kind of a handful in any kind of crosswind. But on calm days, it's stable and predictable and fun to fly around. And I've actually done some mild aerobatics with it. So I have to say that I'm really happily surprised by how well the airplane flies now. And I guess the next logical question is what's next? And the answer would be that I don't know yet. While I'm happy that I went through the process and took this model from its stored condition into now a completed and flying model, it's not really a practical model. It doesn't do anything special. And even when you break it down into its different components, it takes up a lot of shop space, and it takes up almost my whole car just to get it to the field. So I'm not quite sure what to do with it next. So I'm going to sleep on that and give it some thought, and we'll see what happens. But in any case, I'm really happy that you've watched this video and joined me on this adventure with a mystery airplane. And I'm sure that I will come up with another adventure and another airplane real soon. So thanks for watching.